In this talk is a deception of scientific progress, and this is from Dr. Huntley. Huntley. The progress that you understand was not what appears to be. That most people, academics, technologically aware people would disagree and would point out that the extraordinary rate of progress in scientific development and application to this. As a preliminary example, the combustion engine, that the motor car that's being used after hundreds of years, are not real progress. The computers and other technologies is the exception. What the motor car is a consolidation rather than expansion into new systems. And that's in his article, The Paradox of Progress, in the New Educational Series. We readily close off system of information not due to inability to make further discoveries, but through numerous causes, such as a compulsion for the security of having answers, factors such as arrogance and ego, the suppression of knowledge and inventions, or government control through funding over what direction research takes. Therefore, the expansion in progress is limited in many ways, but the most fundamental and overriding factors about which our lives revolved is much more than realized, is the natural limitation that scientific methodologies impose on our research for greater truth. Our lives are very much dependent on the results of scientific methodology. In general, the population, including scientists, are programmed or educated that the only acceptable way of acquiring truth is through scientific methodology. Of course, there's two problems here. One that is simply not true is the massive falsehood being programmed into the population today. Other days and the other ways of determining a high degree of certainty of data. The second problem with the above is that only a fraction of a percent of universal phenomena can be proven by scientific experimentation. We need to explain why the scientific method is so limiting. The urgency would then be recognized of developing other means of determining the truth. Furthermore, we also need to bring to force these other capabilities of evaluating truth using the faculties of the mind. The experimental method is excellent and essential for quantitative evaluations of what it can access, such as measuring the acceleration to the gravity. Such phenomena are relatively known context, and there's no problem with that. However, when science engages in evaluating boundaries of known knowledge, it is restricted to the context of the nature of the observer. In scientific methodology, the observer consists of physical senses by the experimental method, the scientific instrument. Why is that relatively so little universal phenomenon can be detected and measured by the experimental method? This is because the physical senses and scientific instruments is in an energy category spectrum of very low resolution. The first known problem of scientific methodology, exposed many years ago with quantum physics research, results in the quantum physics that says that when we make measurements of a system, we, the observer and detection apparatus, are part of the system. The serious debate about this in the early days is the confusion and concern swept under the rug, so to speak. And the quantum physics show that the observer-observed relationship is contextual. The experimental result depends on the method of perception or dissection. Quantum physics tells us that the observer determines what the observer can know. The simple analogies amenable to everyone's understanding is firstly indicate that the basic tool of perception, the physical sense, and scientific instrument is the wavelength, a sine wave. Science recognized that the wavelength acts as a whole unit. A representative is a quantum particle of that wavelength size. The physical senses scientific instruments involve the coarse, which is the longest wavelength of our third dimensionality, and then the quantum particles, that's for detection, are relatively large. Imagine a large camera with corresponding large film. We're taking a photograph of a large object, like a house, a small object, and then flowers in front of the house. We envision now that the grain size of the film is larger than the flowers, but of course which is smaller than the house. You can see that the film will not pick up the flowers. Scientists say that there's only a house, and they have proof is evidenced by the image of the film. However, the film does not pick up all large objects, even some objects bigger than its grain size. So we have to adjust the analogy to make it corresponding closely with the observation involved in the experimental method. The reason the film registered a house because of the brick size compared to the wavelength. It was larger than the grain size. Now there are many more houses with smaller and smaller bricks below the size of the film grain. Smaller bricks mean higher frequencies, energies, and shorter wavelengths. Remember, the wavelength acts as a whole unit of energy and is referred to as quantum particles, of which the film grain is the analogy. So one can see how the detection system is very limited. The scientific instruments have relatively low resolutions and can only detect a fraction of percent of universal phenomena. No matter how large the body of its frequencies are high, its wavelength is short enough the body would not be able to be detected. The most mind energies frequencies will not be able to detect it. The field effect involved in the skills, the paranormal phenomena, the soul level energies, anything higher than the frequency of 3D, that would be the next fractal levels. Now we don't have the immediate solution to this because this civilization is third dimensional, and civilization is veered too long on this balanced path of knowledge and symbiosis between science and consciousness based on the physical sense. The education factors have allowed the right brain consciousness to become ineffective, and in particular reducing imagination and intuition. A properly developing evolution would have kept a balance between intellect and intuition. This would have enabled intuition to access higher aspects of consciousness when appropriate, enabling a scientific understanding of expanding knowledge into greater integrations and new frontiers of science. The higher aspects of consciousness are fractal levels, as the tree twig has a higher aspect, that is the branch, and that is fractal level, and that is higher is the tree trunk. And each higher level of consciousness is a higher frequency spectrum. That means, using your symbol analogy, to the resolution that is greater, the grain size of the film is smaller. The mind is capable of knowing about the existence of the flowers in front of the house that's not detected by science. The mind, consciousness, has greater potential resolution than our physical senses and scientific instrument. With a properly developed right brain consciousness, all systems could be evaluated. That's why the mind alone is capable ultimately of detecting and evaluating all systems. This seems like nonsense to academics, but the consciousness of the individual internally senses these out of bounds regions of science by means of intuition, which is accessing higher fractal level of consciousness of higher frequency, shorter wavelength, and greater resolution. However, as we have covered in other particles, education and science does not recognize the full value of the right brain consciousness, such as intuition and imagination. The intellect, the left brain, is operating without the assistance of the intuition, of which the latter would raise the level of logic, the freed intellect from its tendency to arrogantly close off systems of knowledge and form dogmas. And as a result, the intellect becomes more and more clever in its mode of operation, declining towards greater imbalance and close-mindedness and rigidity. The intellect increases its control over quantitative understanding of science, that is fine-tuned, but also increases the quantitative explanation in qualitative fields such as music, art, religion, spiritualities generally, and thus falsely eliminating the need to understand what qualitative means. For example, in research into human responses to melodic note sequences, recognition of a tune has been referred to as an illusion. It is not an illusion, even though it is created in the mind, it is so recreated, to the degree that the tune works, and that is recognized as a completed system of harmonics art, good work of art. It is an energy entity, a single frequency pattern that exists in the minds but is above the three-dimensional. Works of great art, music acts as great inspiration, benevolence, altruism, etc., are brought forth from higher aspects, the fractal levels of consciousness. The scientific methodology detects the physical sense, mature instrumentally level. We mean then by deception of scientific progress is that we are limiting ourselves to a narrow framework of data, that is a narrow band of universal energies, but consolidating and endeavoring to perfect this limited system. So the two conditions of development, expansion, and consolidation, that is in the article The Paradox of Progress, show that we tend to close down the expansion and concentrate on consolidation in many subjects. Since the nature is so complex, there is endless consolidation possible. In technology, there's almost endless improvement that can be made with the combustion engine of a motor vehicle, giving the illusion of great progress. It's not. What we see by becoming more successful in quantitative evaluation, that is good in itself, that we may be and are in fact neglecting an understanding of the qualitative. It's because with greater success in the quantitative, the latter seems less and less to require understanding of the more abstract and abstruse qualitative state. So the quantitative, dealing with the separate parts, will close off systems of knowledge to a low fractal level, stopping the expansion factors, and we are back to consolidating only. If anyone thinks we are making great scientific progress, that is pure for the above reasons, they are mistaken. We are stuck on a non-harmonic technology, creating pollutions, toxins, radiation, limited energy sources, and inefficient energy generation. We should have long since moved on into a harmonic technology, no pollution, no destruction to nature and life, endless energy sources, health-giving devices, and relatively noiseless machines. All these are available at a higher fractal levels of consciousness and experience, which soon be replacing this third-dimensional obsolete system of control. And for those who remain, that will be going with that.